Welcome to Beyond the Numbers with your favorite financial power couple. I'm Sky, and as always, I'm joined by my better half, though he'd probably debate that investment strategy.
Hey everyone, Nova here. And honey, speaking of valuable, Bitcoin just made history by breaking $100,000. Remember when you thought I was crazy for buying some at $20,000?
Okay, I'll admit it, you were right on that one, but let's help our listeners understand why this matters. Bitcoin's surge isn't just about price, it's about legitimacy. We're seeing increased regulatory support in Washington, and those Bitcoin ETFs we've been talking about are really changing the game.
It's like Bitcoin finally got its diploma and landed its first corporate job. But seriously, what really catches my attention is how it's being called the new digital gold. Though I have to say, unlike our wedding rings, you can't wear Bitcoin.
Speaking of golden opportunities, let's talk about something that affects everyone, the job market. The U.S. added 227,000 jobs in November, way above expectations. And get this, veteran unemployment is sitting at just 2.8%. As someone whose dad struggled to find work after leaving the service, this really warms my heart.
That's fantastic news. And it's having a ripple effect. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ are hitting all-time highs. You know what this reminds me of? Remember when we were debating whether to invest more during the 2023 dip? This is why I always say, time in the market beats time in the market.
True, but let's not get too carried away. Jerome Powell is still keeping a close eye on inflation, even though we're expecting some interest rate cuts next year. At least 2 cuts are anticipated for 2025, which could mean better mortgage rates for our listeners thinking about buying homes.
Speaking of home economics, did you see Lululemon's numbers? They're up 9.2% after their Q3 report, with international revenue growing 33% year over year. Someone's been buying more yoga pants during our morning coffee runs.
Hey, they're an investment in my health. But seriously, let's talk about these market highs. While everyone's celebrating, I'm a bit concerned about those elevated price-to-earnings ratios some analysts are warning about. It's like when we throw a party, sometimes you need to start thinking about cleanup before the party's over.
And speaking of parties, the tech sector is having quite a celebration. Apple's showing off their AI chops at NeurIPS 2024. They're integrating some fancy new models like Genmoji into iOS 18.2. Remember when I couldn't even get Siri to understand my coffee order?
That's because you mumble before your morning coffee, dear. But speaking of AI, SoundHound AI stock just did something incredible, jumping nearly 150% after rolling out their AI smart ordering system nationwide. It's like when our son's lemonade stand sales tripled after he learned to say please and thank you.
That's quite the comparison. But hey, let's talk about something that affects everyone's wallet: oil prices. Brent crude has dipped below $72, even with all the OPEC Plus drama. That's good news for holiday travelers, though I'm still trying to convince you we should get an electric vehicle.
Well, speaking of EVs, it's interesting you mentioned that Ford and BYD are reporting record EV sales, with BYD getting really close to Tesla's global numbers. Though I noticed GM just sold their stake in the Ultium Cells plant. Maybe we should wait and see how this plays out.
Always the cautious one. But you know what's not being cautious? The U.S. budget deficit. It's hit $1.8 trillion for fiscal year 2024. That's the third highest on record. It's like when we accidentally ordered too much takeout last month, but on a slightly larger scale.
Slightly is an understatement, but here's something positive. Louisiana just passed some historic tax reform bills. And speaking of Louisiana, Meta is investing $10 billion in data centers there. That's going to create a lot of jobs and economic growth for the region.
You know what else is growing? China's foreign exchange reserves. They're up to $3.2659 trillion USD. That's like having the world's biggest emergency fund. Though I still think our 6-month emergency fund is pretty impressive.
Speaking of impressive numbers, let's talk about healthcare investments. Amgen is putting $1 billion into expanding their North Carolina facilities. But I'm more concerned about these increasing pharmacy closures, especially in minority communities. Healthcare accessibility is becoming a real issue.
That's a crucial point. It reminds me of when your mom had to drive 45 minutes to find an open pharmacy last month. These aren't just numbers, they're real people's lives. On a different note, have you been following the EU's attempts at Russian sanctions?
Yes, their 15th sanctions package just failed due to disagreements over oil import exemptions. It's complicated, just like trying to get our kids to agree on where to go for dinner, but it shows how interconnected global economics really is.
Speaking of interconnected systems, the crypto world is getting some serious attention from regulators. The Financial Stability Oversight Council is pushing Congress hard for comprehensive stablecoin regulations. It's like when we finally had to set firm rules about our kids' screen time. Sometimes you need structure.
That's actually a great analogy. And with the SEC's new custody rules creating challenges for crypto firms, it's clear the Wild West days of digital currency are ending. Though I have to say, between Bitcoin hitting $100,000 and these new regulations, our early crypto investment is looking pretty smart, even if I did call you crazy at first.
I'm going to need that in writing. But let's talk about what's happening with the dollar. The robust jobs report we mentioned earlier has actually strengthened the dollar index. Morgan Stanley's pretty bullish on USD, which could impact anyone planning international travel.
Speaking of impacts, we haven't touched on HPE's impressive numbers, minus $30.10 billion in revenue for 2024, up 3.4%, with net income jumping 26%. Remember when we debated adding them to our portfolio last year? Sometimes the boring tech companies can really surprise you.
Just like that surprise date night you planned last week. But here's something less surprising. GameStop and AMC are on another wild ride, thanks to social media influence. It's fascinating how retail investors on platforms like Reddit can still move markets like this.
That reminds me of an important point about market psychology. While we're seeing these all-time highs in the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, technical strategists are warning about potential corrections. It's crucial for our listeners to understand that what goes up doesn't always keep going up.
Absolutely. Just like that time we thought our sourdough starter would keep growing forever during lockdown. But seriously, with gold prices navigating volatile terrain and all these market highs, diversification is more important than ever.
And speaking of diversification, have you seen these tech acquisitions? HubSpot grabbing Frame AI, rumors about Tencent buying Ubisoft. It shows how AI and gaming are becoming central to tech strategy, though I still don't understand why you spend so much time playing those video games.
Hey, I'm just doing market research.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about something more serious, the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act. It's providing crucial tax relief for hurricane victims, which reminds me we should probably review our emergency preparedness plan.
Always thinking ahead, aren't you? That's why we work so well together. And speaking of working well, should we wrap up this episode? We've covered everything from Bitcoin's breakthrough to job markets, tech developments, and global economic shifts.
I think our listeners have plenty to digest. Remember, everyone, stay informed, stay diversified, and don't forget to actually talk about money with your loved ones, preferably over coffee like we do.
And on that note, this is Sky.
And Nova.
Until next time, invest wisely and live richly.